with the June Singleton, LLC, Fitness, Health, Nutrition, and Wellness Podcast. Welcome to Season 5. Today, I would like to welcome Los Angeles native, digital production, author of There Was Violence, entrepreneur, podcaster, host of the Misconnected Podcast, Imani Khalid.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right. How are you?
I'm good. I won't brag about the 68-degree weather we got here in LA.
He is in Los Angeles enjoying the beautiful weather, but that's okay. The sun's shining here in Maryland. Can you give a background on yourself?
Yeah. So the short notes on me are born and raised in LA. Well, to get specific about it, South Central LA. So I'm an inner city kid, youngest of a family of 4. Spent most of my life in LA, and I came up during a pretty interesting time in LA history, because it was on the heels of like the Vietnam War, and then you have this rising emergence of street gangs in LA with Bloods and Crips and Latino gangs. Mm-hmm. We had, coming out of the civil rights era, LA is a pretty diverse place in terms of just the mix up of Latinos and Blacks and where I was from. So, went on to play high school basketball, college basketball, segued into, or actually transitioned into the corporate world with a focus on the entertainment side and digital production. And those are sort of the high level bullet points.
Okay. And did you go to college in the California area?
I did. I graduated from Dominguez Hills, which is in Carson. And I did my grad work in Europe, in Spain. I did a business program in what they call Basque Country in the northern part of Spain a few years ago. So yeah, that's my education.
Okay. And how was that experience leaving LA, going to college and going to Spain? Because, most people from any areas, if they've been there all their lives, that transition of going somewhere else is scary.
Yeah, it was one of the best decisions I ever made. A great experience, but also pretty challenged not being a native Spanish speaker. But I've always been to international travel. I've always had an international curiosity. And one of the reasons that I went is I was considering, maybe changing my life a bit and living abroad, but at the same time, really seeing and feeling how education is being taught in a different country. And then looking back on our country from a perspective of an international neighbor, and just in terms of the way news is covered, in terms of the way people react or actually interact with each other a lot differently in terms of their family and their food and some of their principles. It's just really always interesting for me to go someplace else and just sort of realign my perception of the world and draw some comparisons and what other people are doing, like if they're doing things better than we are, or if there's things that we do better than they do, and vice versa. And, every time I take an international trip, man, I always feel like I've become closer to God for some reason. I can't really quite articulate that, but it was a great experience. And it was hard to come back to LA, with all of the division that we had back in 2018 is when I came back. So it was tough to come back.
Oh, wow. I commend you, because, I will probably want to stay over there as well. All right. So can you tell us how you got into podcasting? The book? What was the premise behind the book?
Well, the podcast is interesting. Like I started grad school right after the right after the former president, I refuse to say his name, right after the former president took office, and looking at the news and how it was covered in Europe, and looking at how Americans were treating each other, I just had this recurrent thought like, man, they don't get it. They're not connecting the dots. They're not connecting the dots. Wow, what blind spots these people have. And so the term I used for that was misconnected. Like, you have this misconnected perception of fill in the blank with whatever. And so I said, after I finish this year, after I finish my 1-year program, I'm going to go back and I'm going to do a podcast dedicated to helping people to fill in the gaps. And Malcolm Nance uses a term that I like, and he calls it, well, not really a term. It's more like some phrasing. He talks about in the world of espionage and warfare, he talks about seeing all the stars in a constellation. And so if you have a wide perception, or if you have a wide view of the constellation of life or politics or health, then you can draw some really good conclusions, because you're connecting all these various dots that are helping shape how informed you are. So that was a motivation behind the podcast. And, it's more of topical commentary and social analysis, because I love breaking stuff down. I love making the complex more simplified. So that's a huge bulk of the podcast. Now, the actual book is interesting, the backstory, because I never wanted to be an author. I've always loved writing. I've always had a passion for film and TV. Being an author wasn't something on my radar. But before I went to Spain, sometime in 2016, I was in the parking lot after I had my Sunday breakfast, and I had a close call where I thought I was going to have a street altercation, or, like a fight with this guy. And what happened was I saw somebody walking towards me who looked to be very angry. He had his fist balled up. He had this intense look on his face. And with that moment, just in micro sessions, I compared that to every street fight that I had, every team fight that I had in basketball, every physical altercation I saw back in the hood in LA, where you see a nasty fight develop. And when you come from that, hey, I can't be thinking too much, because my life may depend on it. You never know what somebody's intentions are. So in my head, I'm getting ready to go to war with this guy who's bigger and younger than me. Like, I'm 6'4" and I go about 220. This guy was a couple of inches taller. This guy was more muscular than I was. But when you get in the mindset of fighting, none of that matters. It's like, I know who's not going to the morgue in the hospital today, and it ain't going to be me. So as a guy, a lot of us, that's our thinking. But what's interesting about that encounter, or that close encounter, is as we're getting close to each other, I'm getting more ready, and I'm throwing micro expressions to be deceptive to him, to make him think that I'm less nasty than I actually am. I'm giving the fake LA smile, like, and I'm kind of changing my body language. But meanwhile, in my head, I'm ready to get into a fighting stance. I'm ready to move my feet. I'm ready, as Mike Tyson once said, to swing with some bad intentions. But the guy passes me. And I'm like, okay, I know that trick too. You pass me and then you sneak attack me. He passed me and he kept walking, and he's calling for some woman in the background, his girl. And I looked back, it was, his lady friend. He was just simply looking for her. But what I was seeing, or what I thought I was seeing, like, oh, maybe this is somebody I made upset. I took a parking spot, or case of mistaken identity. And once it was clear that, dude, you were totally wrong, and that could have been a big mistake that cost you, that was a key moment. It's like, okay, I need to explore this. And, I've had other moments on the spectrum. I was like, okay, this was a tipping point. This was a watershed moment. It's like, I got to explore this. And I went home after I went grocery shopping. Well, first in the grocery store, I sat in the parking lot for 30 minutes poring over that episode. Did my grocery shopping, went home, and I started journaling because I'm in the habit of journaling. And 3 months later, June, I had this 90,000 word document that I just start pouring out. I was like, okay. And I jumped around a bit like a Tarantino movie from the beginning to the end, back to the middle. And I started from the beginning. And what I came away with was, because the question was, what happened to me? Where me as this middle-aged man is potentially getting into this altercation. And the punchline, based on that big journal entry, was there was violence. There was domestic violence in the house. There was street violence out in South Central LA from a small child all the way up until I went to college. So during that, that critical stage of everyone's life, there was all this disruptive violence, and it just didn't impact me. It impacted my siblings, and going back to my mother, it impacted her. So that was the impetus for this book. And it's like, I got to do something with this. I just can't keep this to myself. And if this is happening to me, and I didn't have it as bad as some people in a war-torn country, it's like, oh my God, what is happening to other people? And it's like, I got to share this.
So do you feel that you've always had to have your guard up, or as well as do you still feel like you need to have your guard up from a young experience as a child, seeing violence in the home, seeing violence in the streets?
Good question. The takeaway the short answer is, I feel like I've been passively working on it just from different times of going through counseling, earlier in the years, just inadvertently addressing what was violent trauma. I think I'm 85% better, but in the past 5 years, what I realized is that a lot of that violent trauma spilled over in different parts of my life. It spilled over into the corporate world. And in a sense, an example of that is somebody raising their voice at somebody, or making insinuations at me, or writing an angrily phrased email. And it's like, yo, in my world, you get punched in your mouth for that. And then you take it and there's no going to the police. So there's a biological reaction to stuff like that. In my romantic world, I would, and again, not putting my hands on women because I'm not about that, but emotionally being very protective and sometimes hyper protective of my peace, or when somebody I feel is coming at me and being disrespectful and crossing boundaries, to where I would kill an acquaintance or a courtship. Like, oh, I'm not living through that again. You're gone. Same thing applies to just what could be an innocent social interaction, somebody staring at me a little too long. Even with some friends, like there was spillover, but it's been a long journey. So the short answer is I'm a lot better now. And I've always been a pretty mellow guy until those type of incidents or close calls, until I felt like a boundary or there was an incident that would take me to that place where I'm comparing with what's happening now to something that happened in the house when my parents were fist fighting, or out in the street when somebody was, broadcasting that they wanted to harm someone with a knife or a gun or a 2x4.
Mm-hmm. So growing up, seeing the violence in the home, how did you respond? Because I know for different people, it's different things. Some, kids are trying to jump in and help the mom. Some kids are in a corner crying. Some are in the room under the bed. What was your experience, and what did that look like for you?
I think my oldest sister put it best. I was hyper observant of what was going on in the home, but when there are these disruptive moments where, this is all in the book, where my parents were fist fighting, or one of my parents pulled a gun, usually my mother, there was gunplay, or throwing a hot pot of water on somebody. Like my response for that was, and similar to the way I carried myself in the street, it was stay invisible, don't get in the way, don't get yourself hurt, just wait and just hope for this to blow over as soon as possible, and just stay invisible. And the interesting thing about me staying invisible was that for years I thought I was quiet and bashful. It's like, no, I was all about threat assessment, like checking people out, seeing if it's cool. Can I keep myself invisible and safe to where I'm not a target? And this is me saying this as a grown man, but as a kid, that was my MO. Don't intervene, because I wasn't big enough to intervene. First off, it's like, this started when I was 5, 6 years old. It's like, stay out of the way and, watch yourself. And that's probably one reason why I'm a quick learner. I'm a quick study with a lot of things, like, okay, got it. Don't do these things and I'll stay out of trouble. And the same applies for the street.
So how did your parents respond to you and your siblings after a fight, or a couple of days, or a day after, or maybe later on that night? Did your mom or your dad come to you and say anything, or was it just like, okay, an everyday occurrence?
There was rarely debriefing. It was like there was a constant cycle. If you're talking about an arc, there was, maybe argument, physical confrontation, strong words, a little more arguing, silence, and then things slowly transition back to the normal flow. But there was never any, hey kids, let us sit you down. Let's walk through what happened. Let's acknowledge your feelings and what you may have felt. That's not who my parents were. My parents didn't have those kind of tools. And especially, one of the reasons, like, my mother grew up from what's described as a violent rural situation where there was a lot of gunplay. Like, okay, well, that happened with her. And there was a lot of domestic violence, and there was abuse toward the kids. So one of the gaps in that is an important gap, is they didn't have the tools to break that down to us. And they didn't have the tools to endure life challenges as Black parents, and also navigate away from that, de-escalate that. And, so it was just this repeated cycle, it's just, that would have been nice, because it would have made things it would have made a lot more sense, but that's just not who my parents were. And yeah.
Understandable. So growing up as a teenager, dating, 20s, how did that look for you? Is that something that you thought was the norm in a relationship? Because some people, they do think that's the norm. They get into relationships, they think, oh, I'm supposed to hit him, I'm supposed to hit her, because my dad did it, my mom did it. So what did that look like for you in the dating relationship world?
So that's another key point. It wasn't just happening in our home. It was happening with our extended family, with my aunts and uncles. Like, okay, so-and-so aunt got her wrist broken. This uncle went to jail, and my uncle's got to go visit this other uncle because he put his hands on their sister, so they're going to handle him. It was happening across the street. It was happening down the street. Again, this is all in the book, just where I'm chronicling who all the players were and what was happening in other families and happening in the street. But so seeing violence with your romantic partners or significant others was common. But something inside me said, I don't want any part of this. This is not good. This is not normal. It was very disruptive. Cops would get involved, ambulance get involved, people got killed, people got disfigured. It just quickly became one thing that I wanted no part of, and I was shy away, especially as a teenager. Well, I didn't really date a lot because I thought I was quiet, but I was just really keeping safe. Like, no, I didn't think anybody was thinking about me. Like, I was a late bloomer. In fact, I was telling someone when I got in college that I thought when women started showing interest in me, young women, I thought they were mocking me, and I would get upset. They're like, when they make a comment like, oh, his shoulders or his lips, I'm like, and I'll keep it clean, my language clean, but I would like, the sanitized version, forget you, girl, what you talking about? And I had a teammate to tell me, like, idiot, she likes you. Like, why are you getting all upset? And it was just so foreign. So like all of that violence and stuff affected my self-esteem to where I didn't feel like I had any value as a mate. So I really didn't start dating until like my junior or senior year. But it was a slow moving kind of a thing where the interaction between a man and woman, like a healthy interaction, I wasn't seeing it in very many places. So I was just really improvising as I went on and tried to do what I felt was normal or what was healthy. So like that, but that was a big challenge, man, because other than TV, it's like, okay, well, I can't base relationships off the TV because what I'm seeing in the real world are people who don't like each other and people who don't have tools to like get along and be amicable with one another.
That's very true because, we learn from our environment, what's around us, from our parents, from our grandparents, from our aunts and uncles, from our older siblings, from our friends. And then you try to navigate in the world and you're like trying to figure it out, but you don't really know what it looks like because you really most people didn't have great examples, either from two-parent homes where it may have been domestic violence or a single-parent home where you didn't have a father or a mother to raise you. Mm-hmm. So, wow. Okay, so growing up, you're saying all this violence.
Mm-hmm.
What was it that made you, because you went to college, so what was the deciding factor of, I don't want to be in a gang, I don't, want to sell drugs? What was the deciding factor that I want something different? Because you and I both know that's not everybody's story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the reason I'm laughing is being in the gang wasn't going to happen. My mother would have kicked my ass. Straight up. Like, I ain't even going to front. Like, my mother was tough. In fact, she made the comment loosely, like, yeah, if you think you're going to gangbang, I'm going to gangbang you. Like,
wow.
Got it. Like, I wasn't that kind of kid, but I was like, like I knew like that life is not for me. Like I'm not thugged out. It's like I could fight. I'm very athletic. I was, wiry, strong. But that I knew instinctively that wasn't a life for me, especially when I got around maybe 14, 15 years old, that some of my peers started dying of like gang violence or from like a bad drug transaction. Because this is also the time I came up where crack cocaine really started to blow up. And this is also in the book, along comes with, if you got this big influx of money, then there's going to be violence associated with that also. So I'm seeing and hearing people getting hurt, getting killed. So I'm like, okay, that's not for me. Okay, I don't want to die. What do I do? Like, how do I move myself? But when I got to be around 14, it became clear. It's like, oh, I'm pretty good at basketball. It's like, I'm tall, I'm wiry, athletic. All these college coaches are showing interest in me. I'm enjoying some success. Finally, I have a lane for me. Like, this is something I can attach myself to along with school. And so my whole thing, Lejeune, was don't die. And I'm just now using that language as an adult man, but that was the emotional window. And like the first bullet that ever whizzed by my head, I was 7 years old. Mm. I remember exactly where I was, walking past 81st Street, and pew! Is that a bullet? You know, the first time I had a gun put on me, I was 12 years old by LAPD. Then the second time was LA sheriffs. And, you know, the night of my father's funeral, a bullet whizzed by our head. So it wasn't as bad as it is in Ukraine, say now, where there's rockets striking buildings, but there's an ever presence of violence or the threat of violence. And it's just exhausting to be under that constant level of threat assessment. It's exhausting and disruptive to your development as a child. It disrupts everything you do because you're not fully always in the moment, and you're not fully devoting your attention to some much needed areas like your education and growing up as a young man or woman, because you have to carve out some bandwidth to address a potential threat. And it was happening. And I had a friend he lives in Asia now, but he's from the East Coast. And he's like, well, things aren't like that now. Like, why are you still thinking about that? I'm like, dude, if you experience those kind of emotions over and over and over for a couple of decades, it stays with you. And, you know, it was the kind of world where I wake up someday and maybe there's bullet casings on the sidewalk in front of our house. Maybe there's a trail of blood. Like, you got so accustomed to violence that, you know, you could be walking and see somebody break out in a fight, and you'll kind of watch and you go, huh, that was interesting. Until you get away from it, go to a safe environment, and then come back and it's like, holy shit, this is jarring. Like, wow, have I been living with this like my whole life? So yeah, it's a trip.
So growing up, was there ever a fear of going outside? Or it was just like, okay, this is my environment?
As a young boy, we used to play in the alley because we lived there was an alley behind our house. So the more, like when I was more naive about the world, it's like, oh, I'll play in the alley and I might see something go down. But as I got older, and when you get older, you become a bigger target. It's like, okay, you're on the grid now. And I was a taller kid. So when I got to be around 12, it's like, okay, I'm on everybody's radar because they're going to think I'm older than what I look. At that point, it's a matter of, you better know where the allied neighborhoods are with gangs and where the enemies are. You better know what the politics are, because I can beat this guy up, but that's probably going to mean, like, he's today's problem. I can take care of him. Tomorrow's problem might be his homeboys and his family. So there's that. So keeping that in mind, I really limited my out of school activity. I didn't go a lot of places alone. I didn't wander off a lot of places because things were happening. So, you know, it's like, okay, well, you have this dynamic where it's not really safe to venture out too far, especially if you're not politically aligned in the neighborhood. Like, I didn't have a big, you know, like, I knew a lot of people, but I didn't have that kind of a backup. So it's like, okay, well, then I guess I'll stay home for a bit where some shit might jump off here.
Right.
Like this is kind of the devil I know, and I can navigate this environment. And it wasn't always horrible at our house, but there was times where it was. So keeping all that in mind, it was just play this calculated game of am I going to visit a friend who lives in a different neighborhood? Probably not. Or am I going to stay in a confined area in our neighborhood? Yeah, kind of. Here's this guy again, threatening to shoot this other guy with a Uzi. That's a real story, by the way. I'm like, okay, let me go back in the house.
So the ultimate question is, what was the deciding factor that you knew, okay, I need to heal from this trauma? And how did you even know it was trauma? Because most people don't know it's trauma. It's the everyday life.
Yeah. There's good things about being a man, and there's bad things about being a man. The good things is that a lot of us take pride in being leaders. We take pride in being protectors and providers and all of that. The challenging part of that is us being taught as young men to shove our emotions down and to not be vulnerable, because frankly, some women say that they like that, but if you show that side of you, they may perceive you as a weak guy. Okay. So luckily for me, I'm stubborn as hell. I'm pretty uncooperative with some social norms. And I've been working on myself for quite some time. And the tipping point with that was, it really came after that incident in the parking lot where I took that deep dive and I had to really get into the phone book or the phone booth with what had happened. And that meant it's like, okay, if I'm going to be the best version of myself, I got to deal with this now. Now is the time. And that also means that I have to use the proper language. You were an abused child, like your siblings. You were traumatized, okay? And, that impacted you in a lot of ways. So it's like, okay, so what do I do now? So I just, took that opportunity to really come to terms with a lot that happened. And the big takeaways were my parents did the best they could. Okay, I gotta relieve them of that. I gotta forgive them for that. Some of the people that I went to school with or in the neighborhood, like a guy who I bumped into in the 9th grade who wanted to shoot me because of that, I used to fantasize about running into him as a bigger man now. It's like, dude, let that go. That young man couldn't be coming from a home of love. So a lot of that with people in the neighborhood and my family, it's like empathy. It's like a lot of times people are doing the best that they can. So it's the empathy, it's the, it's the forgiving yourself that you did the best you could. It's a case of using the proper language. And then the fourth big thing was, how can I be of service to people? Because if this happened to me, and I know people have had it much rougher, how can I be a model for people and be a facilitator of getting over your violent trauma? And that's become a huge priority and a huge mission for me, which is why, I created my nonprofit, which is why I'm working on a free app to help people navigate through their violent trauma. So, it was a process, it was just a really like a 5-year process, man, of dealing with uncomfortable emotions, saying to hell with any expectations that as a man that addressing that or acknowledging that makes me weak. It's like, no, you can be more nuanced. You can still be a strong man or woman and still carve out time to address, not only if it's only violent trauma, but if it's some other emotional issue that you have. It's not all or nothing. You can do more than 2 things at once. And that's what I really want to encourage people is positioning yourself to building on what you already have now. If you have a great life, yeah, cool. What if your life can be even better by addressing this past trauma or these past issues? What if that? Because for me, I had a good life. I have a good life. My life is better. It's significantly better because I went through that uncomfortable path of dealing with embarrassing and hurtful moments and emotions and understanding what happened and doing it at a pace that I was comfortable with, and then getting to a place and say, okay, I've looked at this object of violent trauma all these different ways, and now it's time to move on.
So what advice would you give other men that's experienced seeing street violence, seeing domestic violence in the school? What advice would you give them?
I would say to them, fellas, I'm not going to use, I want to use a lot stronger language, but I don't want to make this into a Dave Chappelle concert. I want to respect your platform, but in the strongest terms possible, speaking to all segment of men, guys who got out of jail. We know stuff happens in jail. Guys who've been in the military who have PTSD. Guys from the hood or, for inner cities like me or from a war-torn country. Fellas and women, what's the payoff in holding on to this? Like, if you think something's happened to you, start exploring it. Because it could mean that you're going to now add pleasurable days to your life or years, who knows? So it pays to, if you think or suspect something has happened, take the first step. That first step for you may be different for a lot of other people. Maybe you need to talk to your spiritual leader. Maybe you need to talk to a psychologist. Maybe you need to do like I did and just put pen to paper and journal. It starts with this first step. You don't need to know what the healing process looks like. And frankly, you're probably not going to know. It's not going to look like anything you would envision. But what's critical is to get that vehicle in motion and understand that sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable. But dealing with an uncomfortable experience or an uncomfortable memory doesn't mean that because you're feeling that is wrong. I call that being uncomfortably comfortable. I had surgery on my knee a few years back. The physical therapy was difficult, but it was the right thing to do despite it feeling really painful. Especially for men, and I've said this in the editorial I wrote, and this is not to diminish women because women are great and women have a very important role in the community. Men, we're the foundation and the connective tissue of everything: family, military, manufacturing, whatever. We have to position ourselves to be happier men and not following these old traditions and these old tropes of, I'll just forget about it, I'll ignore it and it'll get better. No, that's why the suicide rate with men is high. Because men don't deal with them. We don't deal with our stuff collectively. That's why men sometimes die prematurely, because you got to get yourself, and for self-care, you got to get your doctor visits, get your prostate check, get your blood work. It doesn't make you more manly to ignore something that hurts you. And if you're running around with a kind of pack of men who are discouraging you from taking care of yourself, you need some new friends. Because these aren't the kind of friends, that's not love. That's not people who care about you. That's not either people who care about you or people who are not smart enough and experienced enough to know what's good for you. So you can be a captain of industry or like this big accomplished leader and still have things that are deeply affecting you emotionally. But if you're like any way that I am, and you always want to position yourself to do great things and live a peaceful life, And as corny as that may sound to people, man, it is the best thing. Then you have to take a step towards, if we're talking about violent trauma, you have to take a step towards addressing it and at least seeing what's going on. You have to do your due diligence, man. So, like that's my big message for everybody, specifically men, because I find that a lot of men don't take care of each other. I hear from it. I hear about it when I talk to them. When I talk to my female friends, she's like, I can't get my husband to the doctor. And that's a shame. Like you can still be a good leader and take care of your family and your business or whatever and still take care of yourself.
I agree with you a zillion%, because I think that is so important. I'm from the South, originally from Louisiana. You already know what that looks like. And going to the doctor. It's not happening unless they're bleeding, they're about to die, they're in stage 20 of cancer. So I believe that to my core. I used to work with Men's Health here in Alexandria. And one of the things, the women would come to the booth and they're like, oh, it's for men. It's not for us. It is for you. You're a mother. You're a daughter. You're a wife. You're a sister. You're a cousin. The list goes on and on and on. Sometimes it takes us as women to encourage that male family member, or that male loved one, male friend, whatever, to go to the doctor. Because all the time, they're not going to do it for themselves, because like you said, you're taught to be tough. You taught to, take it and go ahead and die. No, let's not wait until we get to that final stage. Let's take preventative precaution now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and let me add to that. Like there's a time and place to suck it up and endure. Like if you're in warfare, or if you're running your own business and you have to pull in an extra few hours, like everybody, like we get that, we understand that, but there should still always be time for you to refill your cup and re-energize yourself and give yourself self-care. And let me tell you something else, man. After I've done all that work, I was talking to this with Tavis Smiley a few months back, is the peace. Like I haven't owned a TV since 2017. Like I am comfortable in my own thoughts. I can have it quiet here, and it is quiet here. I don't need something in the background distracting me, because I know in the recesses of my mind, something is bothering me and I'm trying to drown that out so I don't have to address it. I go anywhere and I travel a lot by myself. Just the peace of mind, and freed me up for things that I didn't even know that were important to me. Like just removing that clutter from my mind has helped me in a lot of ways. And I'm saying again to people, man, just imagine what the unknown looks like for you. Like if you take care of business, if you take care of emotional business, and it opens you up to attract the kind of mate that you think you deserve, or it opens you up for that job or that business venture that you think you want and deserve, but you've been hobbled and weighed down by all of this violent trauma. And I can go on and on with many examples, but man, you just, men and women, it's just like, I think once you come out of the other side with that, it's easier to see what I'm talking about and sort of get understanding the perspective that I have. So I don't know, man. It's like, I don't want to browbeat people over it, but that's really why I scream the gospel of self-care with respect to violent trauma, because it's like, I see the number. I've seen some of the numbers, the statistics of the, billions of dollars incurred from violent trauma, and loss of wages and loss of work. Gabby Petito and Breonna Taylor, like George Floyd, like the ripples that violence sends throughout people's lives is far reaching. Like George Floyd family, it's not just about George Floyd family. those people in that community are impacted.
Right.
The store owners are impacted. It's a network of people, whether they know it or not, are negatively impacted. And that shit changes the chemistry and the biology of your body. I'm not a scientist, but I can tell you that physicians will agree that it can disrupt the chemistry or the chemical makeup of your body that may take years off of your life. That's why I'm so serious about this.
And that's actually very true, because it does. I used to work in DC, and I would go to clients and it would be, the car backfiring because they're so used to hearing gunshots, and they'd be like, "Get down." And I'm like, yeah. So it's very true that it does impact you. It impacts your body, it impacts your mind and your thoughts. So, So tell us about the app and where they can get the app.
Oh, well, the app is great. The app is still in the development stage.
Okay.
The pandemic has been very disruptive for me with everything with the book and getting out on the market. So the app at the high level, the app that I'm having developed is an app to help people identify what level or stage of trauma they may be in, and based on their geographic location, to help them find the nearest appropriate level of help. So if you're looking for mental health services, hey, based on your location, here's that resource. If you're looking for somebody to talk to about legality, okay, here's a group of lawyers that are near you. And the same thing applies for shelter and other resources. So we're probably, I don't want people think I'm shouting them, we're probably at least a year off from that getting into the market. But when it does get into the Android and the Apple market, it's going to be free. It's going to be elegant. It's going to be a simple solution where somebody can download it on their mobile phone. And if they're in a moment of need related to violent trauma or resources, they'll have a useful and reliable tool to help them get them to where they need to go. So I would say for now, people can follow on social media, and we can get that at some point. And once that's close to being finished, I can update it and people go, hey, okay, well, it's ready now. I can download it or tell a friend about it.
Okay. And where can they get There Was Violence?
You can go on Amazon and get the paperback, Amazon.com paperback. You get the ebook. You can get the audiobook, which I actually record myself. You can get the audiobook on Apple Books. You can get the ebook on the Google Bookstore also. So it just depends on what version of the book that you want, but I have all three: paperback, ebook, audiobook.
Okay. And where can people find you?
People can follow on Twitter and Instagram. Shame that I don't remember the handle, but search There Was Violence. I think the Twitter handle is at there, ThereViolен1, or just search There Was Violence on Twitter and Instagram. Then if you ever get lost, you can go to the book's official website, which is www.therewasviolence.com. If you want to hear some of my edgy social commentary, go on to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and look for Misconnected with Imani. That's Misconnected, one word, MISCONNECTED. So that's my weekly podcast. And then, that has a social media presence also. Just look for Misconnected on Twitter, Instagram, and actually There's Violence is on Facebook also. So there's a lot of ways to get in contact with me. If you want me to, if you want to talk about the book, if you want to speak at engagements and whatever.
Please contact him, because this is some valuable information that's needed, and especially needed during this time. We're still in this pandemic. Suicide rates are continuously going up, especially for males. And we just really need males to become healthier because, you know, we need the fathers, we need the brothers, you know, we need them. We need you guys.
And the husbands.
Husbands.
Yeah, you need you a good, strong husband.
So definitely contact him if he can assist you in any way with any type of resources and services, or just to, you know, have somebody who's experienced it reach out. But please don't think that you're alone, because there's so many services and resources out here. Same with women, it's resources and services. But I know men suffer a lot more because you guys are taught to be so strong, not to show emotion, because that's a sign of weakness. But we gotta get, you guys gotta get the help that's needed. Until next time, thank you guys for joining me. My first guest for season 5. Thank you so much. You gave some valuable information. I really do appreciate it. Next time, Lejeune Singleton. You can find me at LeJeuneSingleton.com.